So let's start off with a very easy example. We're going to get into much more difficult hands later on in the series. Imagine you flat a cutoff open in the big blind and the flop comes 6 of clubs, 4 of hearts, 4 of spades. How profitable should your opponent's flop bets likely be? So you're in the big blind against a cutoff open. How profitable should it be once you check to him and he bets? Very profitable. Position is very useful on this board and his range is stronger than ours. We're likely going to get crushed defending 60% plus here. So remember, we were in the big blind, so we got a big discount on our call. We got a board which misses our range. We got a board which is pretty useful to be in position on because the turn and river are going to change who has the best hand a lot. This is a spot where we're just not defending 60%. We'll get absolutely slaughtered if we even come close to trying. So very profitable bluffs for our opponent here. Are profitable bluffs for our opponent a problem for us here? No, he's a luck sack for getting a 6-high flop. We can only have 4 nutted combos, and position is quite valuable here. Run harder. So we're not freaking out just because he can bet any 2 cards. Everything seems reasonable. He got a lucky flop. It happens. Does this mean our opponent bets his entire range on the flop? Well, we just said our opponent can profitably bet any 2 cards. So does this mean he's betting his entire range on the flop? No. He checks when checking is more profitable than betting. Just because betting is profitable does not mean checking isn't more profitable. Keep that in mind. That's such an important thing to take home. Just because your opponent can profitably bet any 2 cards doesn't mean he bets his entire range. He still might have hands where checking's more profitable than betting. Explain why donk betting is awful here. Okay, so why would we never donk bet on this board? Well, the EV of a bluff with any 2 cards is very high for the opponent. This makes it harder for checking to be more profitable than betting for our opponent. This is especially true since hands which may check back well here, such as ace, queen, and friends, also bluff well. So think about it here. If you're in the cutoff and you're playing against the big blind, what hands are you checking back on this flop? Probably almost nothing, if not literally nothing. We can't prove you should bet any 2 cards on this flop. Or we can't prove you should bet your entire range on this flop, but it looks pretty reasonable. In fact, if I had to guess, this is probably one of the few spots where you should be betting almost your entire range, if not literally your entire range on the flop. Number 2, our check call or check raise when we're in the big blind will now succeed at a very high frequency. This makes check calling or check raising more plus EV. So if we know our opponent's pretty much always going to bet once we check to him, why would we bet ourselves, which gives them an opportunity to fold? And doesn't let us put in a check raise if we choose to put in a check raise on the flop. So it doesn't make any sense to ever donk bet here because we would always want to check raise with any hand that's strong enough to be putting money into the pot. When we donk bet a hand like pocket 10s or pocket jacks, people might think that's a reasonable donk betting hand. It's really not strong enough to donk bet here. So the only hands that are strong enough to donk bet are going to be pocket 6s and pocket 4s. And those hands are so rare that our opponent's going to be betting the flop so much that we're never going to want to donk bet them. More on equilibriums. As you'll see in future videos, we are forced to try to find solutions by constantly having each player adjust. This is especially true on the flop. For example, we use models to give us a starting point for player A's range and player B's range. We then find a way to improve player A's range by looking at player B's range. We then improve player B's range against player A's new range. We then improve player A's range against player B's new range. We keep going back and forth, improving each player's range until we finally reach a point where we're just like, this looks as close to equilibrium as we can get. I don't see a way to improve either player's range. This is how most games are solved in the real world. Poker, fortunately, is so complicated that you can't just tell a computer, run the simulation and find the solution, so we're stuck using models as a starting point than doing things manually. So keep that in mind. In the real world, you are actually usually solving games this way. You keep adjusting each player back and forth to each player's strategy until you reach as close to equilibrium as you can get, and you use a computer to make that adjustment happen millions of times. The better we get at theory, the better we'll be at getting a really good starting point when trying to solve a hand. We'll know about how many value bets to bluffs we'll need. We'll know how many checks we need to defend. We'll understand when more emphasis should be placed on check calling or check raising.